Hello, people. Yes, so um, as always, we tend to put the titles for these talks about a month, 2 months in advance, so it does slip away from what the original one is. So, although this one is entitled sort of mainly cinemas and theatres, I found a lot more really interesting stuff from I think the medieval period. But essentially, we know people have loved being entertained, and from the 1600s onwards, theatres, playhouses, then music halls were all popular, and these remained stalwarts until the interwar years when cinema, radio, gramophone came to the fore. So this presentation is going to look at all these. So grab your K-Ora. Can you remember that? The K-Ora, two orangey for crows. Your poppets, a little packet of poppets and some popcorn from the usherette, and sit down to what I've described loosely as a blockbuster matinee presentation. And we'll start virtually right back at the beginning in the Roman period. So we know the earliest mass public entertainment came to Gloucestershire with the Romans and their amphitheatres. Amphitheatres, large circular oval open air venues, race seating, used for all sorts of entertainments, gladiator combats, chariot races, venatoni, which is animal slayings, executions. However, we do know also that other events included pantomimes, athletic competitions, and even music were done there. There are about 230 amphitheatres known throughout Rome and Britain. The picture at the top left is the one in Verona, but only 10 have been identified in Britain, sadly, and I don't think that's going to increase much. So really, the only local one was at Cirencester. Gloucester didn't have one, as far as we're aware, but the Corinian one was one of the largest in Britain, capable of holding at least 8,000 spectators, and it was built of stone. The picture on the right there shows the excavation that was done some time ago, and you can see the stone sort of levels for the tiers. We also know that temporary stores have been erected outside for the sale of souvenirs, and there are also of temporary fast food outlets on some sites. Chicken bones, beef ribs, shells of boiled eggs have all been found, or if you prefer the Monty Python version, which I do, lark's tongues, wren's livers, chaffinch brains, jaguar's earlobes, wolf nipple chips, get 'em rather hot, they're lovely, which is a great scene in the film. So we know this entertainment went on, but we know that also that by about AD 350, most British amphitheatres have fallen into disuse, at least for their primary purpose anyway. So really, we don't know anything about really Saxon entertainment. Presumably, this is going on in mead halls, that sort of thing. Where you get the Beowulf and the Herod taught stories. But we know the earliest actual recorded evidence of a dramatic performance in Gloucestershire comes from December 1283, and it's contained in an exchequer alms roll for Edward I, when he rewarded the clerks of Gloucester for performing the Miracles of St Nicholas play and for their Boy Bishop play. These were common enough plays, and this reference, I couldn't get hold of a copy of it because it's at the National Archives, but it's an important reference as it adds to the scanty evidence for St Nicholas plays being performed in England at this time. So Tudor period entertainments focused on basically feasting, drinking, dancing, caving games, gambling. These were enjoyed by all levels of society, but there were other amusements which were probably storytelling. So you're getting wandering minstrels, troubadours, storytellers going from village to village, singing poems, passing news, and telling tales. Ball games, so slightly violent versions of football, although would be perfectly good if you're in Argentina and you play for the national team. This is from the Misericordia at the Gloucester Cathedral, shows a couple of people playing football. These games are played often between villages with absolutely very few rules whatsoever, and they could be quite nasty, violent events. And of course, then you've got public punishments and executions. Always a good day out of the executions, and we know pillories and stocks existed in several places, Gloucester, Charlton Kings, to name a few. Also, more horribly, there are the blood sports, so dog fighting, bear baiting, cockfighting were also all popular. And this is an entry from the Borough Steward's accounts for Gloucester, and we'll look at these a lot. There's a few of these. This records the visit of the Queen's Bearwood to the city. Now, the Bearwood, or another name for them, titled that was Master of the King's Bears, was a royal court official responsible for the care of the monarch's bears, bulls, and mastiff dogs. In many cases, Bearwoods were actually the most prominent purveyors of entertainment in their area, and they were arranging fights, which they called courses, with their bears, and they travelled around the region during the year. And this entry is very scribbly there. It actually starts on the, if you look at the picture, on the second black black writing down. It starts there, and it says also given in reward to the Queen's Majesty's Bearwood for baiting of his bears before Mr. Mayor and his brethren the 2nd of May, and it's 6 shillings and 8pence. That works out to about 77 quid today. It's unlikely that they were doing this to people. This seems like it's a private performance. Cockfighting. So this generally took place in inns where urban and rural elites could gather to watch. We've got a great example in the spring of 1743 when the Bell Inn in Gloucester advertised an inter-county cockfight between Shropshire and Monmouthshire. So this sort of thing did go on. Many places had public cockpits. This is the one at Dunster. I couldn't find one locally. But private houses could also be used. And we know of an example in Painswick, Yew Tree House, where illegal cockfights were held in its cellar, and they were basically caught one day and so were prosecuted. But cockfights were popular on holidays and feast days, especially Shrovetide, which was technically the last chance for good food and unrestricted fun, if you could call it cockfight fun, before the long period of Lent. Interestingly, in 1400, St Oswald's Priory granted its grammar school, which is this crypt school, to Lantony Priory for 30 years. Then in return, Lantony paid an annual sum of money, or rent money, plus 15 fighting cocks at Lent. This was a traditional gift to schoolmasters following the fight cocks after Lent. So they lost so many birds in fighting, they needed new ones. And evidence of this you can still see today. This is the roof of the old crypt school in Gloucester, and this has a cock loft. And these triangle openings on the roof were designed to let fresh air in for the birds. Fairs, so without doubt, these were the biggest forms of public entertainment and were often held on religious festivals, and the right to hold a fair was granted by royal charter, and it was jealously guarded. They were originally commercial events like markets, so they were very closely linked to markets. The picture on the left there is Stowe Fair in 1900. But as the trading element of fairs began to decline, the entertainment aspect grew. And of course, by the 1900s, most fairs were fun fairs, all about fun rides, stalls, and food. And of course, they were and still are very popular, albeit very, very noisy and disturbing at times. This is just a feature. There's one here, a couple of ones by Tewkesbury by Graham Downey and the Gloucester Citizen. And of course, there's always the best chance to get salmonella in the world by eating off one of the food stalls there. Take that back, it's not right. So bare knuckle prize fighting, been a very popular spectator sport at fairs and fetes and markets since medieval times. And originally, anything went, basically. Grappling was allowed. By the late 1800s, rules were added to prize fighting, turning it into the professional sport of boxing, and bare knuckle fighting was banned, although interesting, it was actually restarted legally in 2015. Wrestling was also one of the oldest forms of contact sport, and it's always run separately as a distinct sport to boxing. Some counties, notably Cornwall and Devon, were famous for producing wrestlers. And of course, the wrestling bouts came into town halls in the 1920s onwards, and they were once really, really popular. This is an advert from a wrestling match at the subscription rooms in Stroud, and of course, similar events were held in Cheltenham, Tewkesbury, and Gloucester. I used to go to the town hall in Cheltenham wrestling matches, and it was great fun. You'd see all the TV stars, and of course, much of the success of wrestling like that came to ITV's World of Sport, which always featured wrestling matches before the football results. And I'm sure we all remember the bouts between Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and Mick McManus, people like that. They were great. And the picture advert here on the left, I love some of the names here: Wild Angus Campbell, King Jock Campbell, and the Monster, the Beast, Pedro the Gypsy, or Stoker Brooks. They're great ones. They really are great, and they were good fun, has to be said. So the earliest reference to minstrels in the Gloucester Borough Bailiff's accounts, it's very sadly faded, almost unreadable. I was going to take an image of it, but I couldn't make it work at all. But the entries there, there's about 5 or 6 of them, and they all have these lines: "Saluti pro diverses minstralius," paid out for various minstrels. But after that date, minstrels begin to appear at regular intervals, and many of these belong to various noblemen: the Duke of Gloucester, the Earl of March, and the Lord Steward. This is an entry in the Chamberlain's accounts for 1560, and it's typical. And it begins on the second line down there: "Also given in reward to Justice Trogmorton and his minstrels in ready money 2 shillings. And the minstrels belonged to Sir Nicholas Throckmorton of Carlton Court, just over the border, the north there. And he was a diplomat, politician, and also an ambassador to France and later Scotland. And again, they belonged to them. He's the guy who presumably sponsored them or funded them. And again, we think these were probably entertaining the mayor and the burgesses of the borough rather than the general population, although we can't be sure on that. Christmas plays were always popular, say the first one we had earlier, but they were popular in the borough and also with the public. And again, we got a lovely entry in the corporation's Chamberlain's accounts of 1550, records Sir Anthony Kingston's players performing an Abbot of Misrule play at Christmas. He received 10 shillings, which is about 137 quid, while the company got 5 shillings, about 68. And this is the line it says, also in reward given to Master Kingston's Abbot of Misrule, coming to the city of Gloucester in the Christmas time by the commandment of the mayor, 10 shillings. Also a reward given to the players of the said Master Kingston by the commandment of the mayor by the time of this present account, 5 shillings. So we think the fact they came to Gloucester itself means this was probably a performance, a public performance, which might be one of the first we know about. Really interestingly, I was coming across looking at some of the parish church wardens, and Tewkesbury Parish actually purchased costumes for stage plays and visiting player companies. And the church warden's account record these being hired out to these players when required. And I think this is really fascinating because I've not come across this anywhere else. And we've got a couple of entries here. So this one is 1574. It's very hard to read, but it does read reserved for the loan of the players' apparel, i.e. the clothing. And that's basically 3 shillings and 4 pence, essentially. 1576 is a really interesting one. This is unpriced, sadly, but it reads, item, 1 rich cape, 5 players' gowns, 4 jackets, 4 beards, 2 heads. You know, you can just wonder what their heads were. Are these something like a paper mache head or made of wood? You know, am I thinking of the right thing? Is it a head you put on a spike? I don't know, but what a fascinating entry that is. And again, the last one here comes from 1577, and it records an item received of Richard Dunn for the hire of the players' apparel, 3 shillings and 4 pence, basically about 36 quid. So I think it's fascinating that so far it only seems to be Tewkesbury. I'm going to have to look through some of the other church wardens' records to see if this happened elsewhere. So we'll have a look at the Booth Hall in Gloucester, because this was first recorded in 1230. It was on Lower Westgate Street, and it was the centre of civic administration for medieval Gloucester, basically. By the 1300s, an inn was part of the building, and we think it might have been called the Bear, but it was later known as the Booth Hall Inn. And from the mid-1500s, it was used by visiting companies of players and concerts, as well as performances by travelling showmen. And these actually became regular events until the early 1800s. But because the Booth Hall was a working building that acted as a court for the Gloucester Quarter Sessions and also an office space for the Gloucester Borough, when it was used to put on plays, a stage had to be built. And there's this lovely entry in the Chamberlain's accounts. It's very, very scribbly. You can make out scaffold in the middle there underneath the line. But it records also, in many paid out for 100 of board and nails to make a scaffold in the Booth Hall for the Queen's Majesty's players, a penny. Also played to John Batty, carpenter, and his fellow for the making of the said scaffold, 4 pence. So basically the nails cost £1.14 roughly, the labour costs £4.58. I challenge anybody to get a scaffold made for £4.58 today. So the Booth Hall remained in entertainment value until it was sold by the council in 1868, a long time, but it reopened the following year as the Royal Alhambra Music Hall. Seats were being priced at 6 pence and a shilling, which is about £1.57 and 3 quid respectively. At times it was used by the famous Pindar Circus and even as an ice skating rink. You know, how they got ice in there to freeze and stay cold, I don't know. By 1884 it became a proper theatre and it was named the Royal Albert Hall, but in 1893 it was acquired by Pool's Theatres, who renamed it the New Royal Albert Theatre. Henceforth, it was used by touring companies, with the latter being booked jointly with Cheltenham's Theatre Royal, which we'll look up later. And again, by 1902, it changed its name again to the King's Theatre and Opera House, offered musical hall and drama, still owned by the Pool family, and they specialised in their myoramas, which we will look at later. One of the things I found is that these music halls and these entertainment values and cinema cinemas we'll see later, they change their names repeatedly. So you find one and then you'll suddenly find 20 years later it's known by something else. So if you're looking at these, it's something to bear in mind. You're not necessarily looking for the name you think it is. Quick look at jesters. So jesters, part of the household of a nobleman or a monarch, kept to entertain guests, and they often travelled and entertained common folk at fairs and markets. So the king, the lord might say, "Oh, I'll meet you next Thursday at Hereford." So their jester might go ahead and play through the various places. And we've got two entries in the Chamberlain's accounts record two such visits to Gloucester. And here's the entry here: "And in money likewise given in reward to a jester of the King's Magistracies, and another coming with him by commandment of Mr. Mayor, 5 shillings." So it looks like these two jesters, I think, came and did some performing either in Gloucester or just for the borough. Another one here, also reward given to the Queen's jester by the commandment of Master Mayor, 3 shillings and 4 pence. So again, reasonable sums of money they're getting at the time. So throughout the 16th century and onwards, there are frequent visits of companies of players of Gloucester. And this entry from the Chamberlain's accounts is typical. It starts on the second line down there, and it basically also given in reward to the Lord Robert Dudley's players at Mr. Mayor's commandment in ready money, 6 shillings and 8 pence. Then also given in reward to Sir Andrew Fortescue's players at Mr. Mayor's commandment in ready money by John Smith, 4 shillings. So you get these entries cropping up time and time again, which gives you an idea that there are quite a few of these companies coming to Gloucester and also presumably around the other towns in the county to put on plays to entertain people. There is a rumour, vicious rumour maybe, that Shakespeare came to Gloucester with the Lord Chamberlain's men who were supposed to have come here. I've not found an entry for them at all, the Lord Chamberlain's men. They might have come under a different name. We know Shakespeare was playing with this company, and the company's still going strong today. You can go and see them. They're doing Othello this year, which will be great fun. So we do think, Shakespeare, he might have come to Gloucester. He certainly wrote about Gloucester and various things, but, we've got no real hard evidence for that at the moment. I can't resist doing a bit of Punch and Judy. So it's got its roots in Italian commedia dell'arte of the 1500s, professional comedy theatre usually performed on the streets. Mr. Punch comes from the character Pulcinella, anglicized to Punchinello, and he is actually a variation on the Lord of Misrule, the boy bishop. So this idea of being turned upside down. So the poorest servant being king for the day, that sort of thing. It took off really after this restoration when art and theatre re-emerged after Puritan rule, but it was present beforehand. And we've got this lovely entry in the Stewart's accounts from 1589, shows a payment to Lord Chando's puppet players, which I think is a fascinating. It might not be Punch and Judy, I doubt it is, but it's definitely puppets. And of course, originally puppets, Mr. Punch, were marionettes, but they reinvented as glove puppets because they had to cope with what turned out to be quite violent action. And if you're doing violent action, so if Mr. Punch is beating people up with his stick, if he's got the strings in the way, it's very difficult. So to get rid of the Marion strings, they reinvented as glove puppets. So Punch and Judy, as we know, was originally for adults, but it changed over time into children's entertainment in the late Victorian era. And this is a lovely picture from Stroud around 1900 of children being entertained by Punch and Judy. And the picture on the right is Gloucestershire's very own Professor Collywobbles. He's great. And this is seen at Gloucestershire's annual Vintage and Country Extravaganza show, which is on in a couple of weeks. If you've not been, thoroughly recommend you go. It's a great show. But one reason for the change away from being an adult show to a children's show was that the members of the show's cast, the original members, included the Devil, the Hangman, and Punch had a mistress, Pretty Polly, and this was seen as very inappropriate for the young audience. So those characters were dropped, and Punch and Judy remained the children's one, which is a bit of a shame because an adult Punch and Judy is very funny. So wandering entertainers also had to be very careful. They didn't fall foul of the Tudor anti-vagrancy laws, which stayed in force for several, a couple of hundred years. And this could see you imprisoned and then whipped out of towns. And we've got an entry from the Court of Alderman order book here, 1624, relates to 4 entertainers who came to the city and had to show their commission from the Crown's Master of the Revels to get permission to perform in the city. And the entry reads, at which time one Henry Sands, with 3 others, brought a commission under Sir Henry Harbert's hand and seal, Master of the Revels, and requested Mr. Mayor to let them play according to their commission, which was dated the 18th day of September, 22nd year of James I. Directed to the said Henry Sands, Alexander Baker, and Robert Barker. He confessed his name was Barker, not Baker, so there's a typo there for them. And they had with them one Jarvis Tennant, a minstrel. And the fact that Jarvis Tennant is a minstrel and the others aren't identified seems to suggest to me that they were probably actors, and Tennant actually provided the music. So plays and performances were often curtailed when plague was about to prevent the spread. And we've got this lovely entry from the minutes of the Manor and 100 Court of Cheltenham, which recorded that on the 17th of January 1611, Guido Dobbins, Richard Clark, and their fellow players marched through Cheltenham banging a drum and proclaiming that whosoever would hear a play should come to the sign of the Crown, because the Crown Inn in Charlton Kings, I think. However, as there was plague in Treddington and Prestbury, the town bailiff prohibited the performance. He came and told them, which is in this thing, not to do it, everything. All's well and good, you think, but they actually went on to Charlton Kings and tried to perform anyway, whereupon they were arrested by the bailiff and fined by the manorial court, and that's what this document is all about. So, Puritanism, described by some commentators as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy, meant that during the interregnum, especially, public entertainment was heavily suppressed. In 1622, the Diocese of Gloucester published its Articles of Inquiry, 8 pages of total misery, to be fair. And on page, I think it's page 5 or 6, you get this line that prohibited anywhere on the Sabbath lords of misrule, dancers, players, or any other disguised person, stage plays, bear baitings, bull baitings, or other such unlawful and profane exercises. Goes on to say, ban sports or anything that does sit in the tavern, alehouse, or the streets. God, they were dull. However, Restoration, woohoo, party time. This saw an explosion of revelry, and as well as taverns and inns doing a roaring trade, dancing, blood sports restarted, so did the theatre trade. And before long, upmarket entertainment arrived, and there were concerts of music for soloists visiting from Gloucester, from Bristol and Bath. Many of these took place at the Tollsey in Gloucester. This is here, seen this in this engraving of the cross, at the cross, and it's the building on the left with the jetty, and we think they actually used the upper floor here. But other fashionable entertainments included balls and assemblies, as well as performances by touring companies of players and troops of itinerant entertainers. So it really was a good time to be alive if you like public entertainment. So moving on into the 1700s, you get theatres begin to appear in most county towns. In Gloucester, as well as the Tollsey, the Boothall and the Bell, a new theatre, we don't know its name, opened in Barton Street in 1763. And this is written by Reverend Robert Gegg of Ashelworth, who wrote in his diary about a company of strolling players who came to the theatre, and they'd also been performing elsewhere earlier in the week. However, this theatre didn't appear to last long or went downhill, because it's just 20 years later, its manager, Samuel Riley, described it as a melancholy, inconvenient place which, when filled, would not hold more than £35. So obviously it wasn't making a huge amount of money, I suspect. Another more famous entrepreneur was impresario actor John Bowles Watson of Cheltenham. In 1782, he built the first permanent theatre in Cheltenham at the York Passage, but he also built the Theatre Royal in Gloucester and was also closely associated with Cirencester Theatre. Look at the Theatre Royal in Gloucester. So in February 1791, the Gloucester Journal reported that we hear that Mr. Watson has made a purchase of a convenient spot in Westgate Street, now encumbered with old buildings, which are to be taken down, and a commodious theatre is shortly to be erected. And this was Gloucester's first purpose-built theatre, built by a chap called John Blinkthorne, opened as the Gloucester New Theatre in 6th of June 1791. After Watson died in 1813, there was a series of unsuccessful managements of the theatre until Blinkhorn built it in 1857 for just £450. He rebuilt it in what was then the traditional horseshoe shape of a theatre, redecorated it throughout, and renamed it the Theatre Royal. And its most famous visitor, arguably, was Charles Dickens, who once performed the trial scene from the Pickwick Papers to a capacity audience there. This has got this lovely 1802 playbill for the Theatre Royal, and it advertises the second section down there, a phantasmagoria. This was a form of horror theatre used magic lanterns to project frightening images such as skeletons, demons, and ghosts onto a semi-transparent screen to keep the lantern out of sight. And mobile or portable projectors were also used, allowing the image to move around and change size, while other projecting devices were allowed for quick switching of different images. In many of these Phantasmagoria shows, they use spooky decorations, had total darkness, sound effects. These were all key elements. Other special effects included sensory stimulation, such as smell, smoke, and even electric shocks were used. So these must have been something else to see. Must have been absolutely fantastic. So at the Theatre Royal Centenary, it was one of the longest running theatres in the city, has to be said. The world famous actors Sir Henry Irving and Ellen Terry of London's Lyceum Theatre appeared with other members of the Lyceum Company. And you see, they just did some performances. But what I find fascinating is at this time, the Lyceum Company's manager was Bram Stoker. So he would have come to Gloucester. So that's something for us to get our teeth into, isn't it? Sorry, bad pun. I couldn't resist it. 1902, the theatre was sold to Charles Poole, the Poole family, who changed it to a variety theatre and a picture house. And he's putting on Myrama shows. I've not looked at Myrama shows. They're such a specialist subject; they need more. But there is some great books on Poole's Myrama around. After several name changes, the Theatre Royal eventually closed in 1922 and was later demolished. Cheltenham, Theatre Royal #1. So, having managed Cheltenham's first makeshift coffee house yard theatre from 1779, the actor and impresario John Bowles Watson established the town's first purpose-built theatre. It was on the east side of the passage door to the York Tavern. We know that King George III visited it on 3 occasions in his 1788 visit, and of course then Watson decided to call it the Theatre Royal, hence there. And the map there from the 1855 Old Town Survey of Cheltenham, you can see it's called there the York Rooms. However, again, it suffered from having no frontage on the street, and also the passageway was actually owned by a domestic house, so that caused a few little problems. But they didn't last long. For in 1839, it was destroyed by fire. And of course, this was a perennial problem for theatres when candles and later gas lighting were used for stage lighting. You had to be very, very careful of this. So the second Theatre Royal, it was in Well Walk, which is now Montpellier Street, above the main Ladies' College building. On the map there, the Ladies' College, the main building, is just down on the top right there. It was built in 1849, included a large music hall called the Royal Wells Music Hall at one end. I'm not sure about that. I think it might have been a separate building, but I couldn't figure it out with the maps I was looking at. But the Theatre Royal is set at the other end, so there's the Theatre Royal, obviously clearly, and it became Cheltenham's principal theatre until demolished in 1890 again after a fire had destroyed it. Shortly afterwards, a new theatre for the town was constructed on a different site in Regent Street, and this theatre was designed by Frank Matcham. This one, built on this former Assembly Room site, opened in 1891 as the new theatre and opera house. Today, it's better known as the Everyman Theatre, and we'll look at that a little bit later. So it opened with a performance by Lily Langtry in 1891 in Lady Glencarty. When it was first built, it seated 1,500 people on bench seating, but it was later rebuilt into a more standard sort of theatre arrangement. Interesting, in World War II, it became a garrison theatre. This was a requisition dedicated entertainment venue where travelling Ensign troops, concerts and cinema screenings were put on to boost morale of stationed and local troops. And of course, that included both British troops and Canadian troops and American troops in Cheltenham. After World War II, it was run by Borough Council, but in June 1959, it was closed under the threat of sale. But it was saved after quite a vigorous public campaign, and it was reopened in 1960, being renamed the Everyman. And obviously, it's still going today strong. We have lots and lots of their programs and things. So if you're interested in the Everyman as a subject, come and have a look. We're on a Cirencester, so early entertainment in Cirencester were few, we think, probably because we know the Abbey exercised almost tyrannical control of all what went on in the town. But by the 1800s, a theatre had opened in Gloucester Street. This picture comes from the Society for Theatre Research, which is a really interesting site. And again, it was run by the impresario John Bowles Watson and his family from Cheltenham. Over the years, many performers came here: the Siddenses, the Kembles, Charlotte Clark, just child stars Master Betty and Miss Fisher, and on Tightrope Walk, John Ritchie also appeared there. I've got this lovely, interesting playbill from 1830. It features Miss Foote for 2 nights. She was actually Maria Foote. She was later the Countess of Harrington, and she was a prominent English actress. And it described her as being of pretty face but of limited ability. But she was actually most famous for a sensational 1824 breach of promise trial against a wealthy suitor when she won £3,000 in damages. She doesn't seem to have much luck in getting married. She was actually promised as 2 men promised to marry her at various times. The one sort of dropped it and didn't come back. The other one, she argued it was like a real contract, and he was the one. He was quite rich, hence the £3,000 she got. Cirencester also had the Corn Hall. This was designed by local architects Midland and Maybury as a corn hall, as a corn exchange for the town, because there wasn't one in Cirencester at town. However, it was on the town's old Booth Hall. It was used as a corn exchange, but this tailed off with the Victorian slump in agriculture in the 1860s and 70s. And it then became like a community venue, hosting lectures and performances by amateur and visiting professional theatre companies. And these are just some of the images here from the Bingham collection that we have here at the archives. So I'll move on to cinema. Of course, there are loads of other theatres we could have looked at, and the ones that are still going today, we'll see some more King's Theatre in Gloucester. There's quite a few around, but literally it's depending on what we had on them and time and space for this talk, really. So we look at cinema. So cinema was called the pictures because it was a shortened version of the phrase moving pictures. Early films were often known as the flicks because early film projectors had a large advance time between the frames, and this essentially made the screen appear to flicker, which is interesting. And of course, by getting to this time, you're getting private people actually doing shows. This is Moody Bellinson and Cheltenham Advertising, cinematograph, autographs, gramophones, and optical lantern exhibitions. You could hire them into your house. But interestingly, most UK cinema at the time was actually cine variety. This is a form of entertainment which roughly ran between 1900 and 1930, and it combined live stage acts with a silent screening of silent or early talkies for a single admission price. And the acts often included comedy routines, acrobats, singers, entertainers, magicians, and very often the stars of the films or the radio and variety theatre would be among the cast, but they were quite something. But by the 1930s, this had started to fade out a little bit, and a typical cinema show would include a feature film, a B-movie, a trailer for the following week's show, a newsreel, a cartoon, plus a live stage show. And really, that set the stage. It continued up into the 1970s, certainly. But during the 1930s and 40s, cinema grew into the principal form of popular entertainment, despite radio, and people often attended cinemas twice a week, often sometimes more. So we'll look at some of the cinemas now. So Gloucester, they have the King's Hall Picture House. So this was the old Booth Hall, the King's Theatre and Opera House. It got a new lease of life as a cinema, becoming the King's Hall Picture House. Just dropped the theatre and opera, Bang's your old, Bob's your uncle. In this guise, we know it presented cine variety until it closed in 1914. And there it is next to Shire Hall. However, it soon reopened, and from 1918 was known as the King's Picture House, mostly showing films, but also had the occasional variety show. By 1922, it had been taken over by the Cheltenham Original Brewery Company. Don't know why. But it ceased to be a cinema in the 1930s, remained empty for some time until it was finally demolished to make way for an extension for Shire Hall. And this picture shows the building of those extra wings on Shire Hall. And so the actual cinema would be underneath that main block in the centre there. So, The City Cinema, which went on to be the Hippodrome and the Gaumont Theatre, opened in 1911 on Eastgate Street. In 1914, it was altered back from a cinema into a cine variety venue, and it reopened as the Hippodrome. In October of 1955, a major fire broke out in the roof spaces during a performance, and luckily there were no casualties, but the building was gutted. And it was then purchased by the Rank organisation, who rebuilt it and reopened it as the Gaumont Theatre in April 1959. However, just 2 years later, they closed it, and it stood empty unused for another 5 years until it was demolished and a branch of British Home Stores was built on the site. Now it's bingo, isn't it? Palmer's Picturedrome, The Witch and the Olympus. Situated on Barton Street, this cinema was opened in January 1993 for ECJ Palmer, aka Picturedrome Palmer, of the Gloucester Cinema Company. Had seating for 700 people on 2 levels, and when it first appeared, it had stalls and one upper circle. That's a lovely picture of Picturedrome Palmer there. It was also known for raising money collections on the cross at Gloucester, and that's one there. By 1834, the theatre was operated by the Picture House Limited, and had been renamed the Picturedrome. In 1943, it was bought by ABC, Associated British Cinemas, and underwent modernisation, including new equipment for screening cinemascope films. May 1955, it again renamed the Ritz Cinema, but when ABC opened their new Regal Cinema in King's Square in March 1956, the Ritz went over to playing reruns of ABC releases. And this obviously wasn't very profitable. In April 1961, ABC closed it. But when the Gaumont Theatre Cinema closed 2 weeks later, the City Council persuaded ABC to reopen the Ritz. Business was initially good, but it soon tailed off, and in March 1962, just a year later, it closed for final time. It then went through a whole host of changes, becoming a bingo venue. In 1986, it was purchased by the Gloucester Operatic and Dramatic Society Gods, who reopened it as a theatre. But sadly, since then, it's undergone a series of yo-yo openings. Various people have bought it, opened it, closed it, etc. And again, at the moment, sadly, it's currently closed. The Regal, so originally constructed by ABC as a large cinema with stage facilities, and was the last sort of picture palace to be built in Gloucester. Construction began in 1939 to the design of ABC's in-house architect, W. Glenn, but on the outbreak of World War II, it was put on hold, and it wasn't until 1955 that work recommenced. And again, its actually design was modified at the time. But it was a big cinema, had a seating for over 1,000 people in stalls and 460 in the circle. And from then on until 1974, many top name stars and annual pantomimes appeared on stage there, and it was quite a good venue, quite famous. March 1963, it was renamed the ABC, and it was taken over by EMI in 1974, and it was closed for conversion to a triple screen cinema in April 1974. And as a 3-screen cinema, reopened in July 74, so they did a lot of work there. 658 seats in the former circle extended forward. In the former stalls, a 348 and a 294 seat auditorium, and I remember that, I'm sure most of you do. It was taken over by the Cannon Group and renamed the Cannon Cinema in 1986, but they closed it December 1990. And this time, they were subsequently purchased by J.D. Wetherspoon pub chain, converted into one of their bars, and opened as the Regal 1996. And it's still got a fair bit of cinema heritage in there. So again, if you've not been in there, it's worth it. It's got a lovely King Kong. You can see the top of the stage is still there and everything. So it is worth it visiting it. So in Cheltenham, the Daffodil, so it's designed by local architect Leonard William Barnard, Art Deco building, opened in 1922 as Cheltenham's first purpose-built cinema, and it had 750 seats, including kissing seats for courting couples, which you don't see anymore. But it struggled on, screened its last film in 1963, and then closed as cinema. Over the next few days, it became a bingo hall, a furniture showroom, an antique store. From 1988, a fairly posh restaurant moved in, but that closed permanently in 2023. And today, the building's been converted into 4 residential homes. I don't know how much change is going to be on the inside. A fair bit, I would imagine. The Hippodrome Coliseum in Cheltenham, designed by local architect Herbert T. Ranger. It was owned by a chap called Gill Smith. It opened as the Hippodrome Theatre in 1913. And how it's quickly soon renamed the Coliseum in 1919. And after renovations, it reopened as a music hall in 1920 with a 30-foot wide proscenium, which is the stage arch, a 40-foot deep stage, and 9 dressing rooms. So it seems to have moved away from cinema to theatre. But it continued as a cinema as well until it closed in 1974, and then it became a bingo hall and a snooker club before being demolished in 2011. And I certainly remember going to that in Cheltenham. I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey and also the Disney classic Fantasia there. My mum took me to both of them, so I remember those dramatically in there. The Gaumont Palace, the Odeon. So the Gaumont Palace opened in March 1933 in Cheltenham with a seating capacity of 1,700 plus a 100-seat cafe ballroom there. Built in the Art Deco style, the facade had 2 relief sculptures by Newbury Trent. You can just see them there by the Odeon sign, depicting dancing figures holding up strips of celluloid, and they're sort of entitled something like the spirit of romance of the film, these artists alike. But it was also equipped for live shows and had a Compton 3-manual 8-ranks organ. That might mean something to somebody who knows about organs. It means absolutely nothing to me. I'm a Hammond organ fan, as they did in Red Dwarf. But in 1937, it became the Gaumont Theatre and then the Odeon Theatre from 1962. And that's the guys where I'm sure most of us remember it. The stage was also used for pop shows in the mid-1960s with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones all performing there. God, imagine getting them there today. 1973, it became a 3-screen cinema, and later it was even altered into a 7-screen cinema. But despite this, it couldn't be made to pay. Closed in November 2006, demolished in 2014. You wouldn't know it's there now. And I don't know. I wonder if the relief sculptures were saved somewhere. I had a feeling they were, but I'm not sure. Stride, the picture house, so opened in August 1914, converted from the George Hotel. Lovely photo of it there. And funny enough, it was just one of 5 cinemas that were once in Stride. So Stride was very well served for cinemas. The picture house, though, was quite small. I love that picture showing the entry there. Had a little cafe for patrons equipped with an organ, although we don't know its make. It was later taken over by something called the Albany Ward Circuit, and in 1927, with the rest of the Albany Ward Circuit taken over by Provincial Cinematograph Theatres. They were taken over by Gaumont British Theatres in 1929. It closed as a silent movie cinema in 1932, but reopened in 1934 while the Gaumont Palace was being built down the road. After that, it was demolished and closed, being replaced by shops. Cirencester, so the popular Carillion Picturedrome, was one of the town's early pioneering cinemas, opened its doors in 1911. As well as films, it had local entertainment featuring early dramatic reading, stage presentations, the revolutionary moving picture shows of the era as it came up. As this programme shows, I couldn't resist it, also shows football matches. In this instance, a recording of the 1912 FA Cup final. This is just in case we've all missing the football that's been on recently. We need a bit of a hit. This was actually played between Barnsley and West Bromwich Albion. It played at Crystal Palace Ground on the 20th of April. But if you notice, this is actually being shown on the 1st of May. So it's been recorded, and it's going to be filmed, not recorded, then it's going to be shown later. It was a 0-0 draw, and so replay was played at Bramall Lane in Sheffield on the 24th of April when Barnsley won 1-0. Now, whether it actually had the other game in it as well, I don't know. But great. So Cirencester's first purpose-built cinema was the Picture House, opened on the corner of Victoria and London Road in 1924, later renamed the Gaumont, and closed around 1963 to make way for flats that stand in its place now. And a lot of things I found with these cinema houses is there is actually very little information surviving. There are a couple of very good websites that you can go onto for histories of cinema and theatres, but even they are sometimes struggling to find information. But we've got for the picture house in Cirencester, we've got this lovely plan of the seating area here. The price of the seats, the numbered seats cost 9p, about £3 today. The other stall seating cost either 6p, £1.95, or 3p, 98p respectively. And I really like that picture. Interestingly, though, what I found is if you read that closely, all these seats were subject to a 3p booking charge. So we now know where the online ticket sales places today get this idea from. Book it online, we're going to charge you money for it. Criminal, but there you go. It's the only game in town. So the Electric Picture House at Wood Under Edge began life in 1911 as an upstairs room of the de-licensed Crown Inn. Initially, it showed only silent films, but by 1920, demand had outstripped its capacity. So in 1921, a new auditorium was constructed following the demolition of stables nearby, and it increased to 220 people. 1930 installed sound equipment way before cinemas in Dursley and Thornbury, the competition did. In 1947, the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Coe, put it up for sale, and it was sold to a Mr. C.M. Jenner, a retired farmer who continued to run it with his daughter and son-in-law for over a decade. The sheet there comes from the sales particulars, which we'll look at again in a minute. 1960, though it closed, and though it briefly opened, it closed again, then became a boxing club. The auditorium was repurposed for bingo, but again, after some yo-yoing of things, it reopened as a cinema in 2005 and remains a cinema today. So again, it's a great little venue. So when the cinema was put up for market, a set of sales particulars were created by the sales agents Davis, Champion and Payne and Stroud. This provided details of the setup and the equipment. So you've got the cinema here, which is going to be a going concern with a foyer, box office, spacious lofty hall, a coal house, WC, most important, rewinding room, projection room, and an engine room. And the cinema had its own electrical plant to power its two Cayley 8 projectors. That's going to mean something to somebody who's interested cinema history, and that they were powered by a Crossley gas engine and a petrol oil engine, which powered Wrighting Wood and Crompton generators to make the electricity. And it's such a good little pamphlet, this one. So newsreels. So December 1930, something new appeared on the programmes of two of Cheltenham cinemas, newsreels. The Daffodil went with the Gormont Super Sound News, while the Opera House played British Movie Tone News, two different ones. And these newsreels were short cinematic documentary films. I'm sure we've seen them. They featured current events, news, and also entertainment news. They were widely shown in cinemas from the 1910s, really, up until the mid-1970s. Certainly I remember them going to the ABC in Cheltenham on a Saturday morning King show. They would show them. So I'm sure all of us have seen them. Before the advent of real radio and television and 24-hour broadcast, these were the primary way people got the news sports. You had the newspapers, but these were the moving pictures, most exciting. I couldn't resist putting this one in. We're coming to the end of the tour, only a couple of slides left, and I couldn't resist putting this one in, hecklers. And it seems that they've always been a problem for actors on stage, I think. This deposition comes from the Diocesan Court Act books, and it recounts a case brought against the wayward vicar, John Wilmot, in 1602. He attended a play at the Booth Hall in Gloucester, but was slightly inebriated and the worse for drink. At one point, he shouted out that he could play better than any of the stage actors and offered to take one of the players' instruments and play it on the stage himself. He caused such a lot of hassle. His colleague Thomas Hill pulled him back, but he continued to cause trouble. I think he was ejected and eventually later brought before the diocesan court and fined heavily. And I couldn't resist finishing the show without these ones from the fantastic film Shakespeare in Love. Mr. Henslow explained to Mr. Fenniman about the theatre business. Mr. Fenniman, allow you to explain about the theatre business. The natural condition is one of insurmountable obstacles on the road to imminent disaster. Fenniman, so what do we do? Henslow, nothing. Strange enough, it all turns out well. Fenniman, how? Henslow, I don't know. It's a mystery. Great. And then one more on actors. I can't resist this again. Scene, you're in the Globe. Peter comes up. A black day for us all. There is news come up river from Deptford. Marlowe is dead. Stabbed to death in a tavern at Deptford. Ned Allen. It was a quarrel about the bill. Henslow. The bill. Actors. Vanity. Allen. Not the billing. The bill. Which again, I absolutely love. And we'll fin there. Happy to take some questions. The next event at the Heritage Hub, Saturday, 1st of August, all about films and cinemas, called Bring Out the Popcorn. There are talks on the history of cinema by Ross Campbell, A Life in Cinema by Mark Cunningham, who's the owner of the Sherborne Cinema, which is a great one in Gloucester. You've got to go. Stepping back in time, it's fantastic. Plus, we've got a film show of local footage taken by the Gloucester filmmakers, formerly Gloucester Cine Club. And as usual, we've got the usual document display, free refreshments, and the Family History Society on hand to hand out family history goodies from the stores. Our next Secrets Revealed talk is on the 26th of August, and it's called Tales from the Riverbank, and it's a look at mills of Gloucestershire and sort of all things rivers. And on that note, Gemma, I will hand back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely fascinating and very clear. You've done masses and masses of research trying to find all those different bits. But incredible.
That's why it wasn't finished about 10 minutes ago.
The important thing was it was finished. So we've just got a few comments just to and questions just to pop to you. First of all, Emma mentioned that she'd heard of Compton organs, but she did say she's got to go now. But just to say thank you very much. And Rob said sculptures were saved and are now mounted on wall of the brewery centre, which
Yeah, I thought I'd heard something they had been saved, and I was going to say if they hadn't been saved, it would have been criminal because they were. I do remember them, and I'll next time in Cheltenham by the brewery centre, I'll go and have a look. So thank you very much for that bit of info.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got another comment here, which is from Mary. She said that she saw the Rolling Stones at the Galmont and still has the programme and has just found the ticket. It was the Odeon, sorry, by then. And the ticket cost her, I think is that £8, £6. I'm not very good with old money. I think that must be right. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's quite pricey. That's brilliant. Yeah, if you ever want to get rid of them, we'll happily take them here at the archives, and then we'll keep them for posterity. That would be brilliant.
Let's just see if there's anything else. Just a reminder that we have recorded it if any of you do want to watch it again. Joe mentioned a 3-manual organ is one with 3 keyboards. So oh, and Mary has just thank you, Mary. Sorry, I thought it didn't sound right. Sorry, I haven't got my brain switched on.
Imagine trying to see the Rolling Stones for 8 shillings and 6pence today.
Absolutely.
When they did their last tour, we were going to go, and there was something like 400 quid a ticket. And I thought, no, they're rich enough; they don't need extra money.
I have to say, my mum was a massive fan. She managed to get herself kicked out of the Rolling Stones concert when she was 15, trying to climb on stage. So back in the wild days.
Go, Mum! Brilliant.
Go, Mum! Yeah, absolutely. I think that is all the comments, unless you wanted to add to any of that, John.
No, I say it's very interesting about the organ, the three manual one with the 3 keyboards. That's well worth knowing. That's brilliant. Yeah, I'd say, with all these things, I have to quickly become a sort of semi-expert in the subjects, and on one like this, which I will be frankly honest, I know very little about, and I've had such a good time researching this one, especially the early Boer records. Despite I've been pestering people for the handwriting, some of the words I couldn't get, but this has been a really interesting one, and I'm glad people have enjoyed it. Certainly I have. I know.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely fascinating, John. Well, we hope to see you all hopefully at the Saturday event, but if not, at our next Secret Revealed talk. Thank you again so much for joining in, and we will see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.